Parents spent 180K on my brother's wedding but refused my 12K for college. Now they need me. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe through it. My mother, Karen, was sobbing on the other end of the line, her voice cracking with a desperation I hadn't heard since she thought she lost her diamond earrings a decade ago. My father, David, was just a heavy silence in the background, a man so thoroughly defeated he couldn't even muster a word. They spent 180K on his wedding, but refused my 12K for college. Now, my mother Karen is sobbing on the phone. Subscribe and leave a like to see where this irony took me. We don't know what to do, Emily, Karen cried. The bank? They're talking about foreclosure. Everything we've worked for. I stared at the peeling paint on my apartment wall, a small one-bedroom place that cost me half my salary as a paralegal. A job I got after putting myself through night school, working 2 part-time jobs and living on instant noodles. My degree wasn't from a fancy university. It was from a state college that cost exactly $12,000, a sum my parents had called an unnecessary expense at the time. What about Daniel? I asked, my voice flat and calm. It was a defense mechanism. If I let the emotion in, I'd either scream or hang up. There was a pause. Oh, honey, my mother said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You know Daniel and Chloe are just starting out. Their new house, the mortgage is so high, and with the baby on the way, they can't possibly... I almost laughed, just starting out. Daniel and Chloe had a wedding with ice sculptures shaped like swans. They had a 5-course meal for 300 guests and a 10-piece band. Their honeymoon was a month-long tour of Italy. My graduation gift from my parents had been a $25 gift card to a bookstore. They didn't even attend the ceremony because it conflicted with a golf tournament David wanted to play in. So the $180,000 you spent on the wedding is gone? I asked, making sure to say the number clearly. All of it? Don't be cruel, Emily, she snapped, the desperation momentarily replaced by her familiar defensiveness. It was a beautiful day, a celebration of love. We were investing in their future, in our family's legacy. Investing. That's what they called it. They had poured their life savings into a one-day party for my brother, the golden child, while I was told to get a loan or a third job. They weren't investing in a future. They were buying social status. They were paying for the perfect Instagram photos for Chloe, whose own family was wealthy and expected a certain standard. My parents, who ran a moderately successful hardware store, had stretched themselves to the breaking point to impress people they barely knew. And what happened to the store? I pressed, ignoring her accusation. Business was good, last I heard. It's complicated, David finally mumbled from the background. His voice was raspy. The economy... some bad decisions. Bad decisions. I had a feeling those bad decisions had names, and their names were Daniel and Chloe. My brother had started helping out at the store after the wedding. He had all these grand ideas about modernizing, expanding, and taking big risks. He talked about synergy and leveraging assets, words he learned in a single business seminar he attended. I suspected he had leveraged my parents right out of their own business. I see, I said slowly. I walked over to my small kitchen and poured a glass of water. My hand was steady, which surprised me. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching a movie about someone else's family. What exactly do you need from me? We need a loan, Emily, Karen said, her voice pleading again, just to tide us over, to pay the bank and get back on our feet. You've always been so good with money, so responsible. The compliment felt like a slap. I was responsible because I had no other choice. I learned to budget because no one was there to bail me out. I learned to save because I knew every dollar I earned was one I couldn't ask for. They weren't praising my character. They were praising the resource they now wanted to tap. I thought about the years of being second best, the missed birthdays, the forgotten achievements, the constant unspoken message that my ambitions were smaller, less important than Daniel's. He was the son who would carry on the family name. I was just the daughter who was expected to be quiet and not cause any trouble. I'll help, I said, and I heard a joint sigh of relief on the other end. But I wasn't finished. I'm not giving you a loan, but I will look at your finances. I will see exactly where every single penny has gone for the last 2 years. I want to see the store's books, your personal bank statements, Everything. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't defeated like my father's or waiting like my mother's. It was a cold, heavy silence. The kind that happens when you've just called a bluff in a high-stakes game. "Why would you need to do that?" Karen asked, her voice suddenly wary. "Because you said it yourself, Mom," I replied, taking a sip of water. "I'm responsible. And responsible people don't throw money into a black hole. I need to see the leak before I even think about patching it." I knew they didn't want me to look. They wanted a check, no questions asked. They wanted me to play my part as the dutiful daughter one more time. But the girl who would have done that had been forced to grow up a long time ago. And she had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people who are drowning is to not jump in with them, but to find out who pushed them in the first place. A few days passed in a tense, buzzing silence. I went to my paralegal job, filed motions, and organized discovery documents, all while a separate part of my brain was bracing for impact. My parents didn't call back to argue or rescind their request. That told me everything I needed to know about how desperate they were. The call finally came on Thursday night. It was my father, David, his voice low and gravelly. "We'll see you on Saturday, Emily," he said. No preamble. "Bring whatever you need." "I'll be there at 10, I replied, keeping my own voice even. "Have everything ready." The click of the phone ending the call felt deafening in my tiny apartment. I sat on my secondhand sofa, the one with a spring that always poked me in the back, and stared at the wall. For a moment, the sheer injustice of it all washed over me again. The $180,000 wedding, the ice swans, the Italian honeymoon. All for Daniel, the son who was supposed to be the brilliant businessman, the one to carry the family legacy. And me, the daughter who was told $12,000 for an education was a waste. My grandfather, who built the original hardware store with his bare hands, always used to say, "You can't build a house on a rotten foundation. Eventually, the walls come down." I guess I was about to get a good look at the foundations. Saturday morning, I drove my 10-year-old Honda Civic to my parents' house in the suburbs. It was the house I grew up in, a perfectly nice 2-story colonial that now seemed to sag a little at the edges. The lawn needed mowing and a few shingles were missing from the roof. Things I'd never noticed before. My mother, Karen, opened the door before I even knocked. She was wearing a silk blouse that was slightly wrinkled and her smile was stretched painfully tight. "Emily, honey, come in. Coffee's on." David was at the dining room table, not looking at me. In front of him was not a neat stack of files or a laptop with accounting software. It was a large cardboard box, the kind you use for moving. It was overflowing with crumpled receipts, bank statements stuffed into envelopes, and a few old, hard-bound ledgers with cracked spines. This was it. This was the financial heart of their lives and business. A mess of paper in a box. "This is everything?" I asked, my voice betraying a hint of disbelief. "We're a bit old-fashioned," Karen said with a nervous laugh, wringing her hands. "Daniel was supposed to help us digitize all this, but you know how busy he is with the new house and Chloe." Of course. Daniel was too busy living the life they'd paid for to help them manage the mess left behind. I took off my jacket, laid my own laptop on the table, and pulled the box towards me. The smell of old paper and dust filled the air. For the next 2 hours, I worked in silence. My parents hovered in the background, making coffee, watching TV with the volume on low, pretending this was a normal Saturday. I started by separating everything by year, creating piles on their polished dining table. It was worse than I thought. There were credit card statements with staggering balances, notices from suppliers that were marked second notice and final notice, and withdrawal slips for large sums of cash. But it was the store's expense ledger from the last year that made me pause. Daniel's modernization project was a financial bloodbath. Thousands of dollars on a new website that got almost no traffic. $10,000 for a rebranding consultation with a friend of Chloe's. A new point-of-sale system that the employees apparently found too complicated to use, so they were still writing receipts by hand. It was a textbook case of someone with big ideas and no practical knowledge setting fire to a pile of money. But then I found something else. A recurring monthly payment. It wasn't a huge amount, not compared to the other expenses, but it was consistent. $2,500. Every month. Wired to a company I'd never heard of. Lifestyle Ventures LLC. It wasn't a supplier. It wasn't for rent or utilities. It was just there. I picked up the statement. Mom, Dad, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet hum of the television. They both looked over, startled. What is Lifestyle Ventures? David's face went pale. He looked at Karen, a flicker of panic in his eyes. My mother, on the other hand, immediately went on the defensive. Oh, that's just a business expense, she said, waving a dismissive hand. Some marketing thing Daniel set up. For influencers, I think he said. I stared at her. You're paying an influencer $2,500 a month to promote a local hardware store? It's about brand awareness, Emily, she snapped, her voice sharp. It's a long-term strategy you wouldn't understand. I looked from her flustered face to my father's terrified one. They were lying. It was a clumsy, obvious lie. This wasn't a business expense. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was another crack in the foundation. I calmly put the statement into a separate folder. I wasn't going to get the truth out of them today. I'm taking this box with me, I said, standing up and starting to pack the papers back in. I need to scan everything and build a real spreadsheet. I can't work with this. You can't just take it, Karen protested. I can, I said, my voice cold and firm. You asked for my help. This is what help looks like. I'll call you when I have a clear picture of the damage. I picked up the heavy box. It felt like I was holding the weight of all their bad decisions, all their secrets, all their misplaced priorities. As I walked to the door, David finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. Be careful, Emily. I didn't know if he was warning me about what I might find, or just warning me in general. Either way, he was too late. I had been careful my whole life because I had to be. Now it was time to stop being careful and start getting answers. Back in my apartment, the cardboard box sat on my floor like a tombstone for my parents' life's work. For 3 nights, I meticulously scanned every single piece of paper. Crumpled gas station receipts, handwritten invoices from the 1990s, credit card statements with coffee rings on them. It was a chaotic archaeology of financial decay. I built a spreadsheet, each cell a small, neat box of truth in a sea of denial. The numbers didn't lie. They told a story of a business bleeding out, slowly at first, and then all at once. The hemorrhaging started exactly 2 years ago, right after Daniel's wedding. Sales were down, but expenses were skyrocketing. There was the $10,000 for the rebranding, the $5,000 for the useless website, and a series of smaller, foolish purchases that added up to a fortune. But my eyes kept drifting back to one line item, the one that felt different. Lifestyle Ventures LLC, $2,500, every single month, a clean automatic transfer. It wasn't messy like the other expenses. It was deliberate. My mother's lie about it being for influencers was so absurd it was almost insulting. I knew in my gut this was the key. At my paralegal job, I had access to business registration databases. During my lunch break on Monday, with a cheap salad sitting untouched on my desk, I typed the name into the search bar. My heart was pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The result came back in less than a second. Lifestyle Ventures LLC registered in our state 18 months ago. A domestic limited liability company. I clicked on the link to view the corporate filings. My breath hitched. I had expected to see Daniel's name. I had steeled myself for the confirmation that my brother was directly and secretly bleeding our parents dry. But it wasn't his name. The sole registered member, the owner of the entire company, was Chloe, my sister-in-law. I leaned back in my chair, the cheap office fabric scratching against my blouse. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. It all became so clear, so horribly simple. This wasn't just Daniel being an idiot. This was a coordinated effort. Chloe, who came from money and was used to a certain standard of living, had set up her own personal pipeline directly into my parents' business account. It was her private allowance. $2,500 a month, tax-free, disguised as a business expense. $30,000 a year? For what? For brunches? For designer bags? For the car payments on the new SUV she paraded on Instagram? I thought about my parents' terrified faces when I asked about the company. They knew. Of course they knew. They were complicit. They were so desperate to keep Chloe happy, so terrified of not living up to her family's standards, that they were letting her siphon money from the business that was supposed to be their retirement, their legacy. They weren't just victims of my brother's incompetence. They were willing participants in their own destruction, all to maintain the illusion that they belonged in Chloe's world. My grandfather's words echoed in my head. You can't build a house on a rotten foundation. Eventually, the walls come down. The foundation wasn't just the failing business. The rot was in the very core of my family. It was the years of favoritism, the belief that Daniel's happiness was worth more than my future, the idea that buying a daughter-in-law's affection was a sound investment. The walls weren't just coming down, they had been bulldozed. A cold fury, different from any anger I had felt before, settled deep in my bones. This wasn't about being second best anymore. This was theft. It was a quiet, polite, family-approved robbery. I printed the registration document, the crisp paper feeling heavy in my hand. But I knew it wasn't enough. If I confronted them now, they would create a story. They would say it was a loan, a misunderstanding, anything to protect Daniel and his perfect, expensive wife. I couldn't just show them the leak. I had to show them exactly where the water went. I had to prove, beyond any doubt, what that money was used for. I closed the database and packed up my things for the day, my mind already racing. I would go back to that box tonight. I wasn't looking for ledgers anymore. I was looking for Chloe's bank statements, for credit card bills that matched the dates of the wire transfers. I was no longer just an accountant trying to fix a problem. I was an investigator building a case against my own family, and I would not stop until I had every last piece of evidence. The next night, my apartment was a war room, and the enemy was a single cardboard box. I didn't sleep much. The image of Chloe's name on that LC registration was burned into my mind. I had the who and the how. Now I needed the what for. I needed to tie her secret income stream directly to the lifestyle she flaunted online, the one my parents were unknowingly, or knowingly, dying for. I dumped the contents of the box back onto my floor, the papers spreading out like a fan of failure. This time, I wasn't looking for business ledgers. I was hunting for personal documents they might have mixed in by mistake. My parents weren't organized. It was my only advantage. I sifted through old utility bills, car repair invoices, and medical records from when I had my tonsils out. For a moment, I felt a pang of something, a memory of my mom bringing me ice cream. I pushed it away. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who would sacrifice one child's future for the other's present. Deep in the box, under a stack of faded hardware store catalogs from a decade ago, I found it. A large manila envelope with no label. It felt thicker than the others. My fingers fumbled with the metal clasp. Inside wasn't more of the store's chaos. It was a neat stack of statements held together with a paperclip. They were credit card statements, and the name on the top of each one was Chloe. My blood ran cold. My parents weren't just giving her a shell company to hide an allowance. They were paying her credit card bills directly. Bills that she was clearly sending to their house, not her own multi-million-dollar new build. She was treating them like her personal finance department. I spread the statements out on my floor. A year's worth of my sister-in-law's life laid bare in black and white. The numbers were sickening. $400 at a designer boutique on Rodeo Drive. $600 for a wellness retreat spa day. A $200 charge at a restaurant where appetizers cost more than my weekly groceries. There were charges for high-end baby gear, organic meal delivery services, and a subscription to a wine of the month club that cost more than my electric bill. And then I saw the pattern. I pulled up the spreadsheet I'd made on my laptop, the one tracking the payments to Lifestyle Ventures LLC. The dates were a perfect match. On the 3rd of every month, $2,500 would be wired from my parents' business account to Chloe's company. On the 5th or 6th of that same month, a payment for a similar, often identical amount would be made to this credit card. It was her system. The LLC was a laundry. She'd take the business expense from my parents, deposit it, and then use that clean money to pay off the extravagant life she was living. It was so blatant, so arrogant, she didn't even try to hide it. Why would she? She knew my parents would never question her. She knew they were too scared of losing her, of losing the status she gave them. I thought of my own college years. The nights I spent eating plain pasta because I'd used my grocery money to buy a required textbook. The time my car broke down and I had to take 3 buses to get to my night job because I couldn't afford the $400 repair. That single spa day Chloe enjoyed cost more than what I needed to fix my only means of transportation. I looked at a charge for a $1,000 handbag, and I felt a laugh bubble up in my chest, a bitter, hollow sound. That was almost a tenth of the college education my parents had called an unnecessary expense. My grandfather's voice was a whisper in my mind again. You can't build a house on a rotten foundation. Eventually, the walls come down. He was talking about honesty, about integrity. My parents had built their family on a foundation of lies and favoritism. They'd told me my dreams were too expensive while secretly funding Chloe's shopping sprees. The rot was so deep, I wondered if there was anything left to save. I carefully slid the credit card statements back into the manila envelope. This was it. This was the weapon. The irrefutable proof that connected the bleeding business to Chloe's luxurious life. I could go to my parents now, throw it all on their dining room table, and watch them crumble. But that felt too easy, too quick. They had allowed this to happen. They had lied to my face. They deserved more than a quiet family argument. And Chloe deserved to have her perfect, curated world exposed. Daniel, my brother, the golden child, needed to see exactly who he married and what she was doing to the family he was supposed to lead. I closed my laptop. A plan began to form in my mind, cold and sharp as a shard of glass. I wasn't just going to patch the leak. I was going to orchestrate a flood. I would wait. I would gather everything into a perfect, undeniable presentation, and I wouldn't present it to my parents in the quiet of their home. No. I would present it at the one place where image and reputation meant everything to them. The place where the lie had to be maintained at all costs. My moment was coming, and when it arrived, I would make sure everyone was there to see the walls come down. For the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I was Emily, the quiet paralegal, highlighting documents and fetching coffee. I smiled at my colleagues, made small talk about the weather, and did my job with meticulous care. But by night, my small apartment transformed. The credit card statements and LC documents were my new textbooks. I bought a cheap corkboard and pinned them up, connecting Chloe's purchases to the wire transfers with red yarn, like a detective in an old movie. It looked insane, but it was the only way to keep the rage organized. My plan needed a stage. A quiet confrontation in their living room wouldn't work. They would deny, deflect, and gaslight me until I doubted my own evidence. My mother, Karen, was a master at turning her tears into a weapon, making anyone who questioned her feel like a monster. My father, David, would just stare at his shoes in silence, his shame a wall that nothing could penetrate. No, I needed an audience. I needed witnesses to their humiliation. And then I remembered. Their 40th wedding anniversary was in a month. They had been talking about it for years. A huge party at the most exclusive country club in the city. It was meant to be the pinnacle of their social climbing, a testament to their success, their perfect family, and their wonderful son, Daniel, and his beautiful, wealthy wife, Chloe. It was the perfect stage. The foundation of their entire life was that party, that image. And I was going to bring the bulldozer. My phone rang one evening as I was cross-referencing a charge for a $500 baby stroller with a gushing Instagram post from Chloe. It was my mother. I let it ring 4 times before answering, taking a deep breath to steady my voice. "Hello?" I said, my tone carefully neutral. "Emily, thank God." Karen's voice was a frantic whisper. I didn't know who else to call. Daniel isn't answering his phone. I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. "What's wrong, Mom?" "It's the party," she sobbed. "The country club. The final deposit is due tomorrow, and the business account doesn't have enough." David tried to use his personal card, and it was declined. Her voice broke. "Declined, Emily. Can you imagine the embarrassment?" I looked at the corkboard. I could see a charge from 3 weeks ago on Chloe's statement. La Perla Lingerie, $850. I felt nothing. The part of me that would have felt pity had been hollowed out and filled with cold, hard numbers. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, the words feeling like foreign objects in my mouth. "Sorry. Emily, we need your help. Could you possibly lend us the money? It's $5,000, just until the store picks up again. We'll pay you back, I swear. $5,000. For a party to celebrate a 40-year lie, funded by the slow destruction of their own livelihood, while their other child had to choose between textbooks and food. The absurdity of it was suffocating. They weren't asking for money to save their business or their home. They were asking for money to save face. I don't have that kind of money, Mom, I said. It was a lie. I had savings. I had worked and scraped for every single penny in that account. It was my emergency fund, my get out of this tiny apartment fund, my never have to ask you for anything again fund. Oh, she said, her voice dropping, the frantic energy replaced by a cold disappointment I knew all too well. I see. After everything we've done for you? The line went dead in my ears. After everything we've done for you. The phrase echoed in the silence of my apartment. What had they done? They had taught me that my worth was measured in dollars and that I didn't measure up. They had taught me that love in our family was conditional, and my brother held all the conditions. I hung up the phone, my hand not even shaking. Her attempt at manipulation didn't hurt anymore. It was just data. Another piece of evidence for the case I was building. They would find the money somewhere. They always did when it came to Daniel or their image. They would probably borrow it from Chloe's parents, sinking even deeper into their debt of gratitude. I turned back to my murder board. I took a black marker and circled the date of the anniversary party. I had the proof. I had the motive. And now, I had the perfect venue. I started printing out large copies of the bank statements, the LLC registration, and Chloe's most ostentatious Instagram posts. I would put it all into a beautiful, professional-looking presentation, a final report on the family business. My work would be thorough, it would be undeniable, and it would be delivered right in the middle of the toast to 40 years of a happy marriage. The walls were coming down, just as my grandfather said they would. I was just making sure the demolition was a public event. The days leading up to the party felt strangely calm. I went to work, filed my briefs, and came home to my quiet apartment. The stacks of paper on my dining table grew. Each one was a brick in the wall of their ruin, and I was just the quiet mason placing them one by one. I felt like an actress preparing for a role, studying my lines, which were printed in the cold, hard ink of bank statements and credit card bills. There was no rage anymore, just a profound and unsettling clarity. I was simply a force of consequence, the inevitable outcome of their decades of choices. My phone buzzed one afternoon. It was a number I didn't have saved, but I knew the area code. It was from the town where my brother Daniel lived in his perfect house with his perfect wife, Chloe. A house my parents had put the down payment on as a wedding gift. Hey, Em, it's me. Daniel's voice was breezy, like he'd just called yesterday. He never called. Daniel, what's up? I kept my voice neutral, turning a page of a highlighted bank summary. Versace Home Goods, $4,300. So, big party this weekend, huh? 40 years. Wild. He laughed, a hollow sound. Listen, I'm in a bit of a jam and you're like super organized and stuff. Chloe is freaking out about the seating chart. Mom sent her the list and she's convinced the Millers can't sit next to the Thompsons because of some drama from last year's golf tournament. I almost laughed. Seating charts. Their world was on fire and they were worried about seating charts. What do you need me to do? I asked, my pen hovering over a charge for custom ice sculptures. Could you just fix it? You know, move some people around, make it work. Chloe sent you the file. She's just so stressed with the final dress fitting and everything, you'd be a lifesaver. He wasn't asking, he was assigning. Just like when we were kids and he'd make me do his homework because he had baseball practice. I was the reliable, invisible fixer. The support system that never got a thank you. Only the expectation of more support. My parents called me desperate, mentioning foreclosure after a lavish wedding for my brother. What would you do in my position? Comment your thoughts and share. Sure, Daniel, I can look at it, I said. Awesome. You're the best. Oh, and one more thing. Mom and Dad are getting us a new car for our anniversary. A little pre-anniversary gift, you know? He said it so casually, like he was talking about the weather. It's a surprise for Chloe, a white Range Rover, but they're having some trouble with the financing paperwork. Dad said something about a credit freeze? Anyway, he asked if you could look into it. You know, with your paralegal skills. I stopped breathing for a second. A new Range Rover. They were buying him a $70,000 car while their own home was about to be foreclosed on. The bank statements I was looking at weren't just showing mismanagement. They were showing a deliberate, reckless transfer of every last penny to Daniel and Chloe. They weren't just sinking their own ship. They were setting it on fire after loading all the lifeboats with gifts for my brother. A credit freeze? I asked, my voice dangerously steady. That's unusual. Yeah, I don't know. Dad sounded stressed. Just see what you can do, okay? I gotta run, Chloe's calling. See you Saturday. He hung up before I could say another word. I put the phone down on the table. The silence in my apartment was deafening. It wasn't just favoritism. It was a complete erasure of my existence in favor of his. They would rather be homeless than have Daniel experience a single moment of disappointment. They would let their legacy burn to the ground just to keep his world shiny and perfect. I thought of my grandfather, my mom's dad. He was a builder, a man who believed in solid foundations. He'd look at my parents' fancy house with a skeptical eye. He never said much, but I remember him telling me once when I was a teenager crying over some perceived slight from my parents. Emily, when a house is built on a weak foundation, you don't need a storm to knock it down. You just have to wait for the walls to crumble on their own. He was wrong about one thing. Sometimes the walls need a little push. I pulled up the email from Chloe. The seating chart was attached, and below it, a long, gushing message about how she couldn't wait to see me and how she hoped I liked the little gift she'd left for me with my parents. A gift. The thought was so absurd it was almost comical. I opened the seating chart file. It was a map of their little kingdom. All their wealthy friends, their business contacts, the people they were so desperate to impress. I looked at the head table. Mom, Dad, Daniel, and Chloe. A perfect family portrait. There was a small, sad table in the back, near the kitchen doors. Table 14. It had one name on it, Emily. I smiled. They had put me in the perfect spot. I'd have the best view in the house for the demolition. I deleted the entire seating chart and started a new document. It was my presentation. I titled it, A 40-Year Review of Assets and Liabilities. I added the purchase order for the Range Rover to my stack of evidence. It was the final, most damning exhibit. The party was in 2 days. The countdown had begun. The 2 days leading up to the anniversary party were a blur of caffeine and grim determination. I barely slept. My small apartment became a war room, the floor covered in bank statements, loan agreements, and credit card bills. The centerpiece of it all was the crisp, damning white of the Range Rover invoice, complete with a delivery date for the day after the party. A $70,000 reward for my brother's perfect life, bought with the last remnants of my parents' security. My phone buzzed on the corner of my cluttered desk. It was my mother, Karen. I let it ring twice before answering, schooling my voice into a neutral tone. Hi, Mom. Emily, darling. Her voice was a whirlwind of frantic energy. I was just calling to check on your dress. You are wearing something nice, aren't you? Your father's business partners will be there. We need to look like a united family. I looked down at my worn-out jeans and a faded t-shirt. I have something to wear, Mom. Good, good, she said, completely missing the coldness in my voice. And listen, I know things have been tense, but this party is so important for your father's image and for Daniel and Chloe. They're our legacy, you know? Our legacy. The word hung in the air between us, a legacy they were actively setting on fire. I thought about my own legacy, student loan debt, a second-hand car, and a fierce, burning independence they'd forced upon me. Oh, and Chloe left a little something for you here, she added, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. It's so thoughtful of her. Don't forget to pick it up when you get here. A gift. A guilt offering, probably. A scented candle or a cheap bracelet to smooth over the decades of neglect. It was just another prop for their stage play of a perfect family. I won't forget, I said. I have to go, Mom. I'm busy. Always so busy, she sighed, a hint of martyrdom in her tone. All right, darling. See you Saturday. Don't be late. I hung up and stared at the stack of papers. My grandfather's voice echoed in my head, clear as if he were standing right next to me. Emily, when a house is built on a weak foundation, you don't need a storm to knock it down. You just have to wait for the walls to crumble on their own. He was right, but he'd missed a part. Sometimes you don't just wait. You give the crumbling walls a firm, decisive push. I spent the next day compiling everything into a clear, undeniable timeline. I organized the documents chronologically, highlighting the key transactions. The $180,000 wedding expense next to my rejected $12,000 college fund request. The series of large cash transfers to Daniel's account labeled gift. The maxed-out credit cards used for vacations for Daniel and Chloe in the Hamptons. And the grand finale, the Range Rover invoice, dated just 3 days after the first foreclosure notice from the bank arrived. It wasn't just a story of bad financial planning. It was a story of choice. At every turn, they chose him. They chose his comfort over their own home. They chose his luxury over my basic needs. They chose his image over their reality. I printed everything in sharp, clear color copies. I didn't put them in a fancy binder. I slipped them into a simple black portfolio. No frills. The truth didn't need any. It was heavy and absolute. The morning of the party arrived, cold and gray, matching my mood. I showered and put on a simple dark gray sheath dress. It was professional, severe, the kind of thing I'd wear to a deposition. I didn't bother with fancy jewelry, just small silver studs in my ears. I wanted to be invisible until the moment I wasn't. I wanted them to look right through me, just like they always had. It would make the impact that much harder. I picked up the portfolio. Inside, 40 years of bad decisions, favoritism, and financial ruin were condensed into 12 neat pages. Each page was a nail in the coffin of their carefully constructed fantasy. I walked out of my apartment, locking the door behind me. The drive to their sprawling suburban house felt like a journey to a foreign country, a place where I was an outsider, a ghost at the feast. But not for much longer. This wasn't just a presentation. It was a verdict. And I was on my way to deliver it. The house looked the same as it always had, a sprawling 2-story monument to suburban aspiration, perfectly manicured lawn, a new BMW in the driveway next to my brother's Range Rover, and gas lanterns flickering elegantly by the front door. It was a picture of success, a carefully crafted lie I was about to burn to the ground. I parked my 10-year-old Honda Civic down the street, feeling the disapproving stares of the neighbors before I even got out of the car. The black portfolio felt heavy in my hand, heavier than its 12 pages should have. I walked up the stone path and the front door swung open before I could ring the bell. My mother, Karen, stood there, her face a mask of frantic hospitality. She was wearing a silk dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed. "Emily, darling, you're here," she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that was all air and expensive perfume. "We were getting so worried." She pulled back, her eyes scanning my simple gray dress with a flicker of disappointment. "Oh, that's a very serious look for a party." "It's a serious occasion," I replied, my voice flat. I stepped past her into the foyer. The house was buzzing with noise. Champagne flutes clinked. People I hadn't seen in years, my parents' friends, were laughing too loudly, their conversations a shallow river of gossip about golf trips and stock options. "Don't be silly," Karen chirped, ignoring my tone. "It's a celebration, a last hurrah before, well, you know." She waved a dismissive hand, as if foreclosure was a minor inconvenience, like a canceled catering order. I saw my father, David, across the room. He was standing by the fireplace, holding a glass of whiskey he wasn't drinking. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes hollow. He looked like a man who had already lost everything and was just waiting for the paperwork to catch up. He met my gaze for a second, a flash of shame in his eyes, before looking away. He wouldn't be a problem. He had no fight left in him. Then I saw them. The king and queen of the ball. My brother Daniel was holding court by the grand piano, a smug grin on his face as he recounted some story about a ski trip to Aspen. His wife Chloe hung on his arm, sparkling in a sequined dress, her laugh high and brittle. They were radiant, oblivious, basking in a warmth that was fueled by my parents' ruin. They were the reason this house was dying. "Oh, Emily!" Chloe called out, spotting me. She glided over, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "So glad you could make it. I left your little gift on the hall table. It's just a little something to say thank you for being so supportive. The condescension was so thick I could taste it. Supportive. I had supported myself through college while they spent my tuition money on Chloe's designer wedding dress. I had supported myself through every crisis while they bailed Daniel out of every bad decision. I'll get it later, I said, my eyes fixed on Daniel. He finally noticed me and gave a lazy wave, not even bothering to walk over. He was too important, too central to the party's orbit. I moved through the room, a ghost in a gray dress. I listened to the whispers. Such a shame about the house, one woman said to another, stuffing a canapé into her mouth. But David always did spoil that boy rotten. They knew. Everyone knew. They were just here to watch the final act of the tragedy, like spectators at a Roman Colosseum. I saw the whole scene for what it was, a stage play. The set was this beautiful, dying house. The actors were my family and their fake friends all playing their parts, but the foundation was rotten. My grandfather's words echoed in my head again, sharp and clear amidst the party noise. When a house is built on a weak foundation, you don't need a storm to knock it down. You just have to wait for the walls to crumble on their own. The crumbling was happening right in front of me. The laughter was hollow. The champagne tasted of desperation. I found the hall table Chloe had mentioned. Sitting there was a small, beautifully wrapped box with a ridiculously large bow. I tore it open. Inside was a silver picture frame, and in the frame was a professionally shot photo from Daniel and Chloe's wedding. Them, smiling, cutting a 5-tiered cake. It wasn't a gift, it was a trophy. A reminder of their victory and my exclusion. A final twist of the knife. Something inside me, a final thread of restraint, snapped. I left the frame on the table and walked towards my father's study at the back of the house. It was the one quiet room, the place where he signed the checks and made the bad decisions. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The room was dark, smelling of old leather and regret. His large mahogany desk was clear, except for a stack of unopened mail. Probably more bills, more warnings. I walked over to the desk. My hand was steady now. All the trembling was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. I placed the black portfolio right in the center of the leather blotter. It sat there under the dim light, a stark black rectangle against the rich wood. It was an indictment, a final bill that had come due. I didn't need to say anything yet. The silence of that object was louder than any shout. I turned and walked out of the study, closing the door softly behind me, leaving the verdict waiting to be read. The party was about to be over. I rejoined the party, but I was no longer a part of it. I was an observer, a scientist watching an experiment reach its critical phase. I took a glass of water from a passing waiter and stood near the French doors that led to the darkening garden. The chatter and laughter of the guests felt like it was coming from behind a thick wall of glass. It was noise, not communication. My heart was beating slowly, steadily. The storm I had been carrying inside me for years had finally broken, and now there was only a quiet, resolute calm. I watched my father, David. He was still by the fireplace, but he looked agitated now. The hollow look was replaced by a restless energy. He kept glancing towards the back of the house, towards his study. He was a man looking for an escape hatch from his own party. After a few more minutes of forced conversation with a neighbor, he finally excused himself and walked down the hall. He was heading for the study. My breath caught for just a second, then I let it out slowly. The bait was laid. The party continued, oblivious. Chloe was now describing the thread count of her Egyptian cotton sheets to a captive audience of 2 older women. Daniel was laughing, a loud braying sound that grated on my nerves. My mother, Karen, was fluttering between groups, playing the perfect hostess, her smile stretched tight across her face. None of them knew that the foundation of their world was about to be liquefied. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The door to the study remained closed. I started to wonder if he'd just sat down in the dark, too defeated to even turn on a light. But then, the door opened. David stood in the doorway, framed by the dim light from the hall. He was holding the black portfolio in both hands, the way someone might hold a venomous snake they'd just found in their bed. His face was the color of ash, The party didn't stop all at once. It died down in waves, starting with the people closest to the hall who saw his expression. A ripple of silence spread through the room until the only sound was the soft jazz music from the speakers. He didn't look at anyone else. His eyes found mine across the room. He started walking towards me, his steps measured and heavy. Every head turned to follow his path. He stopped a few feet away from me. "Emily," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "What is this?" Karen hurried over, her hostess' smile melting into a frown of concern. "David, what is it? What's wrong?" She reached for the portfolio, but he held it tight against his chest. Daniel and Chloe drifted over, their curiosity piqued. "Dad? What's going on? You're killing the mood," Daniel said with a nervous laugh. I looked at my father, my voice even and clear. "It's a bill, Dad, for my education." Karen scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous, Emily. We've been over this. $12,000 from 10 years ago? This is not the time for your little dramas." "It's not for $12,000, I said, my gaze never leaving my father's. "It's for $1.8 million. That's the conservative estimate." A collective gasp went through the room. Daniel's face went from smug to confused. "What are you talking about? That's crazy." I gestured to the portfolio in my father's hands. "Open it. It's all in there. A full forensic accounting of every dollar you funneled to Daniel over the last decade. The $180,000 for the wedding, the down payment on their condo, the $75,000 to bail out his failed tech startup, the 2 luxury cars, all of it documented. All of it transferred from company accounts and personal credit lines while you were knowingly insolvent." My father's hands trembled. He couldn't open it. He already knew it was true. "It's a document," I continued, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. "That proves a consistent pattern of fraudulent conveyance, moving assets to a family member to shield them from creditors like the bank that is about to take this house." Chloe's hand flew to her mouth. The color drained from her face. This wasn't about family drama anymore. This was about money, her money. "You're lying," Daniel shouted, his face turning red. "Those were gifts." "Gifts are one thing, Daniel," I said coldly. "Systematically stripping a failing estate to fund your lifestyle, at the expense of legitimate debts, is a crime. The bank's lawyers would have a field day with this. They wouldn't just take this house. They would claw back every single dollar. They would take your condo, Chloe. They would take your cars. They would leave you with nothing." The room was dead silent. The jazz music had stopped. Everyone was watching. "How could you?" Karen whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "How could you do this to your own brother? To your family? My family?" I finally turned to her, a decade of resentment in my voice. This family decided I wasn't worth a $12,000 investment, but he was worth a multi-million-dollar bailout. You didn't build a family, you built a kingdom for your favorite son on a foundation of debt and lies. My grandfather always said that when a house is built on a weak foundation, you just have to wait for the walls to crumble on their own. The walls are crumbling, Mother. I looked back at my father, then at my brother and his wife. I gave them my terms. I have a settlement offer in there. You sign this house, the only remaining asset of any real value, over to me. In exchange, this portfolio and all its contents disappear. I don't go to the bank. I don't go to the bankruptcy court. You get to walk away. Daniel and Chloe get to keep their condo and their cars. I let the offer hang in the air. I took a step back, turning to leave. "You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow to have your lawyer contact mine," I said, addressing the whole broken group of them. "If I don't hear from him, I'll assume you've rejected my offer, and I'll be at the bank by 10. I walked towards the front door, the crowd of guests parting for me like I was the sea. I didn't look back. I could feel their eyes on me, 100 pairs of them, watching the quiet paralegal from the state college burn her entire family to the ground. The silence that followed my exit was more profound than any shout could have been. As I walked down the long, stone-paved driveway, I could feel the party disintegrating behind me, not with a bang, but with a quiet, shocked fizzle. The expensive jazz music had been replaced by a tense murmur that I could still hear even as I reached the street. My car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door, looked completely out of place parked behind a row of brand-new German sedans. It had never felt more like home. I got in and locked the doors, my hands shaking slightly. It wasn't from fear, but from the adrenaline draining out of me, leaving a cold, hollow feeling in its place. I didn't start the car right away. I just sat there in the dark, watching the lights of the house I grew up in, the house that was built on my exclusion, the house that might soon be mine. My grandfather's words echoed in my head, not as a memory, but as a prophecy fulfilled. When a house is built on a weak foundation, you just have to wait for the walls to crumble on their own. I hadn't just waited. I had given the final push. The drive back to my tiny apartment was a blur. My mind was replaying the looks on their faces, Chloe's mask of bored superiority cracking to reveal raw panic, Daniel's entitled rage, the look of a boy who had never been told no in his entire life and couldn't process it. My mother's twisted expression of betrayal, as if I were the villain in a story she had written herself. And my father. His silence was the worst. It was the silence of a man who knew, deep down, that all of this was his fault. He had laid the weak foundation, brick by brick, with every dollar he gave Daniel and every opportunity he denied me. I unlocked the door to my apartment. The smell of old books and the faint scent of the instant coffee I drank every morning greeted me. I flicked on the light, illuminating the peeling paint and the stack of bills on my small kitchen table. My student loan statement was on top. $12,000. It seemed like such a small number now, compared to the chaos I had just unleashed. But it had been my mountain, a mountain they had refused to help me climb. I didn't sleep that night. I made a cup of tea and sat on my worn-out sofa, the portfolio of documents resting on the cushion beside me like a sleeping snake. Every time a car passed on the street below, my heart jumped. I expected a furious call from Daniel, a tearful one from my mother, maybe even a threatening one from Chloe. But my phone remained silent. The silence was its own kind of torture, stretching the hours into an eternity. Were they calling my bluff? Were they so arrogant as to believe I wouldn't go through with it? I watched the sun rise, painting the sky in shades of gray and pink over the rooftops of the city. 7 a.m. came and went. Then 8 a.m. My deadline was approaching. I showered and put on my best work clothes, a simple black dress and a blazer I'd bought from a thrift store. If I was going to the bank, if I was going to burn everything down, I was going to do it looking like the professional they never thought I could be. At 8:58 a.m., with my hand on the doorknob, ready to leave, my phone finally rang. It was an unknown number with a downtown area code. My breath caught in my throat. I let it ring 3 times before answering, forcing my voice to be steady. Emily speaking. There was a pause on the other end. Then a deep, tired voice I didn't recognize spoke. Miss Emily, my name is Albert. I'm the attorney representing David and Karen. I believe we have a settlement to discuss. A wave of cold relief washed over me, so intense it almost felt like fear. I can be at your office in 1 hour, I said, my voice betraying none of the turmoil inside me. The line went silent for a moment before Albert agreed. The address he gave me was for a glass tower downtown, the kind of place where fortunes were made and lost in the space of a single meeting. My fortune, it seemed, was about to be made. I met them in a conference room on the 47th floor. The view of the city was spectacular, a panorama of success that felt like a mockery. My parents, Karen and David, sat on one side of a long mahogany table. They looked smaller than I had ever seen them, shrunken by defeat. My father stared at the polished surface of the table, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. My mother just looked old, the carefully constructed facade of her social standing stripped away, leaving only brittle anger and exhaustion. Daniel and Chloe weren't there. Their absence spoke volumes. They were willing to let my parents clean up the mess, as always. Albert, their lawyer, was a man in an expensive but slightly rumpled suit. He slid a stack of documents across the table towards me. My clients have agreed to your terms, he said, his tone flat and professional. This is a quitclaim deed, transferring all rights and title for the property at 12 Crescent Drive to you, effective immediately. I picked up the heavy paper, the legalese blurring in front of my eyes, but I knew what it meant. It was surrender. I took out the pen from my purse, a cheap ballpoint that had signed countless legal briefs at my own small firm. The silence was thick as I signed my name on the indicated line. Then, I pushed the documents over to my father. His hand trembled as he reached for the pen. He didn't look at me. He signed his name quickly, a messy scrawl. Then it was my mother's turn. She stared at the paper for a long time, her jaw tight. I thought she might refuse, that her pride would be the final obstacle. But then, with a sharp, defeated sigh, she signed. Her signature was a sharp, angry gash on the page. It was done. I slid the portfolio of evidence against Daniel across the table. As agreed, I said to Albert. He nodded, taking it without looking inside. My father finally looked up at me. His eyes were red-rimmed. Emily, he started, his voice a dry rasp. I'm sorry. You were right. I should have invested in you. It was the closest I would ever get to a real apology. It wasn't enough to heal a decade of neglect, but it was something. A single cracked brick from the wall he had built between us. My mother said nothing. She just glared at me, her face a mask of pure resentment. For her, I would always be the villain. 2 days later, I drove to the house. A small moving truck was parked in the driveway, the kind you rent by the hour. Not the professional white glove service they had always used. I saw Daniel carrying a box of kitchen supplies down the steps. He looked thin, his expensive clothes hanging off him. He saw me and his face hardened, but he quickly looked away and shoved the box into the back of the truck, refusing to acknowledge me. They were moving into a small rented townhouse on the other side of the state, the best they could afford after liquidating what little they had left to pay off immediate debts. I walked up the steps and into the house. It was mostly empty, with echoes bouncing off the bare walls. The ghosts of 1,000 family dinners and a million silent resentments lingered in the air. In the living room, I saw a faint crack running up the wall near the fireplace, a flaw I remembered from my childhood that my father had always promised to fix but never did. I touched the cool plaster. My grandfather's words came back to me, not as a memory, but as the final, quiet truth. When a house is built on a weak foundation, you just have to wait for the walls to crumble on their own. They had built their kingdom for their golden son on a foundation of lies and my own exclusion, and now it had all crumbled. I stood there for a long time, in the quiet of my new empty house. There was no joy, no triumphant feeling of victory. There was only a profound, quiet sense of justice. It wasn't about the money or the property. It was about the $12,000. It was about them, finally, irrevocably, investing in me. The house was just the collateral. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of dust and new beginnings. It was time to rebuild. From being denied college funds to inheriting their crumbling empire. I stood in my new empty house, breathing in dust and new beginnings. What did you think of this quiet justice? Subscribe for more intense stories.